Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you joined me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. I have a great guest coming on today. I want to bring on someone that has knowledge of the FBI. They have knowledge of intelligence. They have knowledge of a lot of the threats that America faces, but also the internal threats, not just international. So you've seen him before, George Hill, former supervisory intel analyst at the FBI, stints in the NSA and Marines. And George, welcome back to the program. Always enjoy our conversations. How are you today?
I'm great, Nick, and thank you very much for having me back because I truly do enjoy my time with you, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, it's always a great conversation. I mean, you have such institutional knowledge of the agencies and departments in the intelligence community as a whole. And one of the things that stood out to me was last week, you put a post out on X talking about the cartels and how they should no longer be classified necessarily as your ordinary cartels. Can you explain that to the audience?
Sure. So before I left the high-intensity drug trafficking area, the New England HIDTA, as it was referred to, we stopped writing our reports, referring to them as cartels, because they no longer met the accepted definition of the word cartel. They're actually transnational criminal organizations. In other words, they're well outside of Mexico where they operate. The United States and Europe are not just market destinations for them. They actually have representatives in foreign countries. We meaning the U.S. government, we know that they have representatives in Bangalore, India, for the purposes of multi-sourcing the precursors for fentanyl. And we also know that there are representatives from the Sinaloa TCO, we'll just call it that from here on out, Transnational Criminal Organization. We know that they have people seated in Wuhan, China, working on the expediting of precursor chemicals, making sure that the supply chain is running smoothly. And there are other elements of the TCOs embedded in countries around the world for the purposes of money laundering, especially with China, as well as the purchase of using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So these are highly sophisticated transnational criminal organizations that hire the best and the brightest from the top business schools around the globe. And they're very sophisticated. And yes, they do engage in violence, but make no mistake about it, how they operate is worthy of any Fortune 100 corporation.
Yeah, I mean, it really is astounding. And if we look at the last 4 years alone, how much has their power and influence increased?
Well, the Biden administration was really helpful with that. It's estimated that in just human trafficking alone, that these TCOs make somewhere between $10 to $15 million a day. Let that sink in. That's money that is paid up front trafficking human beings across the border. So there is no product that has to be manufactured, carted north to the border, transshipped over the border, and then sold on the streets of America for the money to flow. This is money that they make up front. So $10 to $15 million a day. And it's turned into quite an industry for the charities around the country that are, I guess, euphemistically referred to as charities. Catholic Charities comes to mind, Jewish charities, and some others. I can't remember the name of the NGO that retired Marine Corps four-star General John Kelly sat on, but he was paid very handsomely, high into six figures, just for sitting on the board of directors. So this has turned into a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, enriching not only the cartels, but people who claim to be, humanitarians and, with the lawn sign saying that no illegal or no person is illegal and hate has no home here, that crowd. So they're extremely powerful. Now in Mexico, the cartels decide who is going to run for office. Mexico is a failed state. It is a narco state and is controlled by the narcos, and they have no desire to run the country. As far as like administratively, they just want to have the final say in how the people who do run the country actually run it.
Yeah, there's estimates. I mean, if I go by CIA estimates, it's about 30 to 40% of territory is actually controlled by the cartels, where you have to get the cartels' approval for everything. I was reading a Mexican source that said the number's actually higher. It's closer probably to 50%. And the cartels are actually trying to challenge the government for an additional 20% of the territory. So you look at it, I think you're right. The definition of cartels doesn't really fit. And another thing, when we look at Al Qaeda, 9/11 was the catalyst for the war in Afghanistan. They took 3,000 American lives that day. Obviously, you've had over 5,000 first responders die with subsequent 9/11 related injuries. But if we look at these organizations, the transnational criminal organizations, particularly from Mexico, I mean, every day is like a 9/11, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just want to segue real quick because it was the Twitter post that started this conversation um, regarding the Trump administration and Tom Homan saying they're going to start mass deportations. And then there's talk about even going in on the cartels kinetically using tier one operators. And when I say
Well,
tier
I
one,
wanted to ask you about that because there are some that want to push Trump to declare them terrorist organizations. So, can you get into the tier one operators as well as what would change if they are declared a terrorist organization and whether we should go down that road?
so I actually used to put this in front of my college class, and I heard good arguments on both sides. But when you declare these TCOs as transnational or as terrorist organizations, you open up a larger toolbox for not just the State Department and the Treasury Department to come after them, but you also open up the opportunity for DoD as well as the intelligence community to go in to actually go after them. We already do to some extent. You know, the National Security Agency has a very good collection posture on the TCOs that are operating out of Mexico. So as far as sending in tier one goes, so here we're talking about Delta, uh, SEAL Team Six, that level. Those are your tier one pipe hitters. We're not talking about regular SEAL teams, which are extraordinary men, make no mistake about it, or Rangers or MARSOC, but we're talking about the people that go in, and a lot of what they do is intelligence collection before they do the target elimination. So you're find and fixing and then eliminating the target. So declaring them a terrorist organization does open that portion of the toolbox to allow these tier one operators to go in after them. But then how are you going to do that? Are you going to work with the Mexican government to do that? You can't trust them. They're going to leak it. You're going to violate Mexican sovereign territory. This is not like going into Iraq or Mali or Syria and taking out targets that have been designated by the National Command Authority. So, there's that aspect to it. Trump says that he's a good negotiator. Can he offer Mexico something in return for them turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to us operating across the border? And when that starts, they're not going to, they meaning the TCOs, they're not going to give up a multi-billion-dollar a year industry and just say, well, it was good while it lasted. They're going to fight back, and they're going to fight back in ways that the U.S. is not prepared for. They're going to fight back by sending pictures of the chiefs of police family going off to Sunday services or their child getting picked up at school by their mother. Are we prepared for that? The tier one operate in the shadows, but it doesn't mean that Border Patrol elements and the Texas Rangers or any other state police elements down there on the border are not exposed on social media and other areas. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to come after those individuals. And you talked about Al Qaeda. So these TCOs work with the Chinese. So when we're talking about the CJNJ, New Generation, or the Sinaloa TCO, these people are getting the full support of Chinese intelligence as well. So you're going against people who do not fight by Marcus of Queensberry rules, are not bound by the Geneva Convention or the laws of land warfare, and that are getting support from China. They're also getting support from Venezuela. Venezuela is getting support from Cuba and Iran. So if you go after, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying that it's not going to be something that you may see on the evening news once or twice. You're going to see it maybe in your neighborhood when the power goes down for an indefinite period of time, or the chief of police home gets blown up, or his children get kidnapped, or something of that nature. These people play for keeps, and I'm not saying this out of hyperbole. I'm just saying it based on decades of observation that we've had as these cartels have evolved into TCOs, and now getting the full support of nation states to knock the United States out of a unipolar, global dominant position.
Yeah, it's one of those things that actually aggravates me because when we look at it, these organizations have really been able to rise up unchallenged. And I think back to the 1980s and early 90s where the Colombian government and us partnered. We embedded troops in with the Colombian military and DEA forces with the Colombian military. And we were actually very successful, the FARC. Now, we've had several presidential administrations that tried to do that same model over in Mexico, but the Mexican government constantly rejects it. They don't want to work with us. They say they'll take care of it on their own. Obviously, they're compromised. That's not a secret. But there is something that does concern me. And I don't know if you have information on this, but I remember reports from about, I want to say like 13, maybe 14 years ago, of young men coming to the United States, joining the military, because we do have programs. If you're going to put your life on the line in service to this country, you could earn your citizenship. And a lot of people join those programs. And it's phenomenal. I do believe that if you're willing to sacrifice your life for the United States, you deserve citizenship. That's more than most Americans will do. But we were noticing something different. These young men, particularly coming from places like Mexico and some from El Salvador, were going through boot camp, but then they were vanishing after boot camp. They would just simply disappear, go AWOL, and they wouldn't be seen again. And there were reports that they suspected that these were members to the drug organizations, the cartels, as well as MS-13. Do you know anything about that?
Sure, we saw that. We know that for a fact to be true, that a lot of these individuals would come to the U.S., get training, go through the School of Infantry, depending on, what branch they joined, Army or Marine Corps. And then they would go back home. And at that same time period that was being reported in the press, we saw the birth of Los Zetas, which was a spin-off of the Sinaloa cartel. They were the most violent spin-off from the Sinaloa cartel. And Los Zetas also were comprised largely of former paramilitary people that were trained here at the School of the Americas, at Fort Bragg, and also received very robust military training. So they were the primary recipient of these individuals going AWOL. Los Zetas still exist. They're still a force to be reckoned with. I can't say extemporaneously off the top of my head which provinces in Mexico they control, but they control still a pretty large swath of territory. Everybody's familiar with those up-armored pickup trucks that the Zetas were posing in front of with pretty nicely tricked out M4 carbines and 50 cal machine guns and whatnot. So yeah, that was happening. Are we going to see convoys of what are referred to as technicals, pickup trucks with 12.7 millimeter machine guns in the back or 50 cals coming across the border? No, we're not. But there are people from those organizations that are here in the United States right now that have the wherewithal to wreak havoc in this country. And we also know that there are members of Iran, China, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, all here in the United States, their version of our Green Berets. So we're talking about tier one individuals who are trained in fomenting social upheaval. So they're here. They've been arrested. the administration has quietly shunted them aside, referring to them simply as special interest aliens. But they're here in this country. And depending on who you listen to, there are anywhere from 10 to 30 million illegals in this country. It would just be silly to think that some significant portion of those are not, trained professionals in uh, causing problems for an incoming Trump administration.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I remember when I was back in my emergency management days, there were estimates that there were several thousand active members of Hezbollah here in the United States. And I know a ring was broken up because they were transporting cigarettes from North Carolina to New York to sell. And they operated more as a fundraising wing here in the United States, just like the cartels are raising money with all their activities and drug peddling and human trafficking. But they also are trained to be killers, to be ruthless. And so, do you think there's like tens of thousands of members of these cartels inside the United States today?
I don't think that's an unreasonable estimate. If you're willing to accept that, let's just go with a low number, that 20 million people have come into the United States just since Joe Biden has become president. If even 1% of that 20 million are trained professionals in not just in the dark arts, but more importantly, in organizing and training others, then yes, 10, 20,000 people with skills is not an unreasonable assumption when in fact we should actually assume that's the case and then prepare accordingly. And if we're wrong and it's a much lower number, then hey, that's a great day. It's just like buying, freeze-dried food, and 30 years later you throw it in the trash because you didn't need it. That's a good day.
It certainly is. Now, that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle, and the relationship would be interesting, is under the previous Trump administration, we saw about 300 Chinese nationals each and every month coming into the United States. Now we're getting reports it's upwards of 30,000, all military age males. And when you look at China, you know that it's a police state, that you cannot leave that country. It's a social credit system. You can't get it, your passport. You cannot leave that country unless the Chinese government allows it. And so would it be out of the realm of possibility that these, 30,000 a month, some of them are elements of Chinese intelligence looking to build stronger ties with the cartels and looking to conduct espionage against the United States?
Prudence demands that we make that assumption that these people are trained Chinese operatives sent here to knock the United States off the top of the unipolar world order. President Xi, less than 2 years ago, declared that China declared what's called a people's war with the United States, which means that nothing is off the table. But President Xi operates and conducts Chinese foreign affairs with the idea that they are at war with us. He's not speaking euphemistically or, just throwing out hyperbolic language to make a point. China considers themselves at war with the United States. They do not consider ourselves a strategic competitor or a frenemy or any of those kind of terms that we have tricked ourselves into using to soothe our own raw nerves about a country that we're dealing with. No, China considers us an enemy. If you've read Unrestricted Warfare, which I know you have, nothing is off the table. And that includes sending in, millions of pounds of drugs into this country to tear apart the social fabric. And they've done a wonderful job of that. So yeah, it would be very irresponsible not to assume that there are trained intelligence operatives here in the country waiting for an opportune moment. My assessment is, and I don't really have any intel that I can base this on, it's just an educated guess based on over 40 years in the business, is that nobody's going to kick anything off in between now and by the time Trump gets inaugurated in this country. That irrespective of what may happen in Europe, that's a whole nother matter. They want to wait until Trump gets in because we're already seeing it. They want to get as many of their troops across the border as they possibly can between now and January 20th. Once the door gets slammed shut, that's when the hourglass gets flipped over, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. Hopefully, we're prepared for it.
Now, you just brought up it would be irresponsible to assume that this isn't happening. So let's talk about being irresponsible under this administration, and really even under the previous administration and President Obama's administration. The FBI and our law enforcement communities were constantly putting out that white supremacy is the biggest threat we face. That, there's all these white supremacists running around the United States wreaking havoc, and that's what we had to pay attention to. Are you telling me they were lying?
Oh, absolutely. They were lying. I testified in closed door session at Congress at the Rayburn building that they were lying. Um, that was a political narrative that got thrown out the window when Kamala Harris was so resoundingly defeated in that election, which might explain why both Mayorkas and Ray didn't want to come and testify. Congressional oversight be damned. That was a political narrative. There was never any data to support that, as hard as they tried. But that
Well, you just said as hard as they tried. So how much time did they waste trying to find the phantom of white supremacy and allow these transnational criminal organizations to gain an immense amount of power where they could do real harm to the United States?
Yeah, you're talking about opportunity cost here, and it is immeasurable. It's not like every agent was out looking for white supremacists or parents who were getting uppity at a school board meeting or people that were drinking raw milk or, you know,
Traditional Catholics?
yeah, traditional Catholics, going to Latin mass. Um, it's not like every agent was doing that, but it was a significant amount of resources. And it's especially coming out of the Washington field office. A lot of more people were shunted in that direction to go after, those white supremacists. But no, we saw Steve D'Antuono and, oh gosh, I can't remember the other Jamoke's name. They started that narrative the day after January 6th, and the media went and ran with it, and that went right out the window when Trump was reelected a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing like one of those, I don't know, web things for training and whatnot, going back like 12, 13 years ago. And in the video, you have, the suspicious white guy, putting a car bomb in. And then, the Arab person, the Muslim person was all nervous and whatnot. It was just laughable at the time, especially as the rise of ISIS was taking place. And we saw the San Bernardino shooter, and we saw what ISIS was doing, the Orlando nightclub shooting down in Florida. So, but that's, the FBI is obviously broken. And so I want to bring it domestically because we know the threats internationally, right? I mean, we're aware of the threats that do exist, whether the administration wanted to ignore them or not, the threats are real. But if we look internally at how much damage our institutions have done to themselves because they've allowed ideology to drive the mission as opposed to real world events driving the mission. How damaged and compromised are the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, the CIA? How bad is it?
Well, the FBI, let's just give the most recent example. We're, on the cusp of saying beyond a shadow of a doubt that the cell tower dump related to the bombs that were placed outside of the DNC and the RNC, that the FBI lied about that. They essentially said the dog ate my homework. It was a bad tower dump. I've used tower dumps, going back to my NSA time, to find, fix, and finish targets, both at the NSA and to arrest people and assist in the prosecution here in the United States while at the FBI. That's just silly nonsense. They got caught. It's an egregious lie. So what else? That's the thing about once you lose trust. Once you get caught, then everything else then becomes suspect. You know it from your time at Homeland Security. It's a giglio matter. Once trust is lost, credibility is lost. You can't get it back. It's like having a cheating spouse. You can go to marriage counseling, but you're always going to be looking out of the corner of your eye, wondering like, what are they up to? I mean, once it's gone forever. And Mayorkas engaging in human trafficking, and no one mentions that he's, he was born in Cuba, but he's a naturalized American citizen. Most Cubans I know are probably would make me blush with the level of red, white, and blue running through their veins. That he has allowed this multi-billion-dollar industry to take root of shuffling people across our border, and knowingly sitting in front of Congress saying, he said it. I'm not making it up. Our border is secure. So these people have no credibility. This has all been done intentionally. I hate to break it to some people, but Christopher Wray and Secretary Mayorkas are not incompetent. They're evil. What they've done is intentional. And now we're going to find out just how diabolical their plan was, because by funneling that many people into the country, it serves a couple of purposes, and it's not just illegals voting. That really hasn't happened en masse yet, but ripping that out is going to cause a tremendous amount of social upheaval, and we're already seeing it. There's talk of dare I say, civil war, where Denver mayor, Boston mayor, Massachusetts governor, all saying, Gavin Newsom, that they're going to interfere with a federal law enforcement operation. That is a felony.
Yeah,
Uh,
they haven't read the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause expressly forbids that.
right. I mean, yeah, she's right. She doesn't have to, she meaning Governor Healy, she doesn't have to lend state resources. But if the commander in chief tells the commanding general of the Massachusetts National Guard that they've been federalized, then and she tries to interfere with that, that's just an extreme example. She's going to jail. And I have friends still at the FBI, because oddly enough, I would like to see the FBI, actually do its job, but I still have friends there, and they're all chomping at the bit. They can't wait to slap a set of bracelets on her.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. I mean, first of all, these morons don't realize that's why you lost the election. Is because of nonsense like this. I mean, you would think they would wake up at this point, but they can't. But they don't realize. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is the police forces, like, the local PDs, because they're going to have to make a decision. They're either going to disobey the mayor's order or governor's order, or they're going to get arrested by the federal government. Anyone that impedes the federal government, doesn't matter if you're a local cop or attorney general, district attorney, if you impede the federal government, you can and will be arrested. So it's going to be interesting to see that dynamic. Holman doesn't play games, that's for sure. And he's a no nonsense kind of guy. Now, when it comes to the FBI, how does it reform itself? And there are some that are saying that it's got to be completely defunded and dismantled, and we have a new agency that rises up, just focusing on law enforcement, not the intel aspect. But for right now, the FBI is staying in place. So what is the quickest way you could turn that agency around to get it back to its original mission of a law enforcement agency that arrests and tries to interdict and stop these criminal organizations from operating?
So if you're negotiating, you start off your initial proposal with almost something outrageous. So the initial proposal would be, oh, we need to disband the FBI. Well, that's just a non-starter. It is probably not going to happen. I know a lot of people fantasize about it. They want to do that. But I think what is achievable, which is what you really want to get to in a negotiation, is ending the domestic intelligence service. Almost half the FBI is comprised of intelligence analysts and other law enforcement, Job Series 1811, that have migrated over into that to run that operation. Those analysts actually belong to the Director of National Intelligence. Give them back to Tulsi Gabbard, or to quote Joe Biden and Barack Obama, just fire them outright and let them learn how to code. But that needs to stop. And this is why I haven't lost my agent friends at the FBI, because I want to make law enforcement great again and get the FBI out of the domestic intelligence business. A domestic intelligence service only serves one master, and that's the government that pays it. And they've managed to infest themselves into every aspect of the FBI, up to the human resources department, where people's careers are determined how well they adhere to these arbitrary performance metrics that the Intel program comes up with. So I think that's achievable. We're not talking, pushing the national unemployment numbers through the roof if these people were let go. Most of them are pretty young and out of not too long out of college. I don't know what you do. They
Many are
might,
thoroughly incompetent too. So, you know,
yeah. So I mean, let them get real jobs. Where actually they contribute to the good of the country, as opposed to going after people attending a Latin mass or trying to buy raw milk or something. I think
yeah.
that's achievable, and at a minimum, that's what should happen. And from that point forward, then you can maybe start to weed out the SES, the Senior Executive Service, some of those individuals who have been involved in shenanigans. That's pretty easy to find. Although the DOJ did have a large shredding truck out in front of their building, which I kind of took as a giant middle finger to the American public, like, ha ha, look what we can do, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it.
Yeah, I saw that a couple of weeks ago, and you would think like optics, they didn't care, obviously, about the optics of that. When we look at the new administration that's coming in, are you optimistic that they'll be able to turn around the bureaucracy? Are you optimistic they'll be able to root out the ideological corruption that has weaponized the system against the American people?
Gosh, I'd like to say I'm optimistic. I'm kind of a wait and see individual. I mean, I've watched it grow for so many years. It changed over 100 years ago under Woodrow Wilson, where we have become this administrative state. It's a lot to do. Oddly enough, I think that the Doge, the DOGE, might be the best vehicle for doing that and just defunding a lot of these intrusive elements of the federal government and get them out of our personal lives. That might be the best course of action in getting back to a constitutional republic governed by the rule of law, because I think it's been clearly obvious to a lot of people, especially this last election cycle, that there's an inverse relationship between the size of government and individual freedom. But the only way to reduce the size of government is to end these agencies, not cut them. You don't, if I have if I have, dandelions growing in my yard, I don't cut the leaves off of it and the dandelion, you have to dig it out by the root and end it. So some of these agencies have to go, and that might give us a shot. But I've lived through these before, going back to the '90s of these various commissions. And who was it? You might remember, Nick, that had the Golden Fleece Awards. I think it was Les Aspin or something like that.
Oh, I don't recall.
Yeah.
I remember the
You
Simpson
know,
Bowles Commission.
yeah, I remember all those. And but government success in government is measured by how you grow, how much you can grow your department. So there's no incentive for efficiencies. It actually works the other way. The incentive is growth. So you have to get rid of some of these agencies, and the ones that have forgotten their constitutional oaths, there has to be penalties for what they did. McCabe was about as close as we came to someone paying a price, and he got everything reinstated. Peter Strzok has a nice, sweet gig on on CNN or MSNBC. I can't remember. Lisa Page fell by the wayside. Kevin Kleinschmidt is still practicing law after lying on a FISA form. James Comey is still making seven figures a year as an attorney. There has been no penalty for any of these misbehaviors. So I'm gonna keep my cards close to my chest. I'm sorry, Nick. I know you bring me here for answers and insight, and I'm failing you in that
No,
regard.
you listen, you're right. I mean, there's been absolutely no accountability in the system. We've seen it. People like me always knew with Homeland Security that once you unleash the beast and there's no real international threat, then you and I spoke about this. They have to justify the funding mechanisms coming in. And so we have this domestic terror threat and white supremacists and far right groups and blah, blah, blah. So you're right. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head a time over the course of the last 150 years where government power contracted. And I can't really recall a time. I mean, I think the closest we come is Dwight D. Eisenhower, but that was coming off the Great Depression and World War II. So it's not like we could have grown any bigger. We had to contract at that point because the government was already involved in too much with the president and directing businesses and all that. So you're right. Listen, it's a difficult fight, and that's why people are supposed to keep their eyes open. They're supposed to remain skeptical of government. They're supposed to hold government officials accountable, and Congress is supposed to do their damn job of oversight, as opposed to holding a committee hearing for the public view and then nothing. Because that's what we've gotten over the course of the last 20 years is they'll feign outrage, but they won't do anything to solve the problem, because a lot of them don't want to cut the bureaucracy. They just want their party to be in power of it. So let's hope. We're heading up on a new year. Let's hope things start changing. George, always enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.